She spent her last $10 on a forgotten depot, but her dog refused to leave one spot inside. The wind pushed through the broken boards as Lena stepped into the abandoned train depot, her boots echoing in a place no one had touched in decades. She had nowhere else to go. No plan. Just a roof that might hold through the night. But Rex didn't follow her in like usual. He stopped, fixed on the ticket booth, as if something beneath it was still waiting. Would you have trusted your dog enough to dig into a place like that? The wind came in low, dragging dust and paper along the cracked asphalt behind the grocery store. It made a soft, restless sound, like something looking for a place to settle and not finding one. Lena Carver sat with her back against the brick wall, knees drawn in, her coat pulled tight across her chest. The cold had already worked its way through the fabric. It always did. Night seemed to make it sharper, more deliberate. Rex pressed close to her side, not just near her, against her. His body heat steady, his breathing slow and controlled. Every now and then his ears flicked toward the alley entrance. A passing car, a loose shopping cart rolling somewhere out of sight. Footsteps that didn't come closer. He didn't sleep. Lena rested one hand on the thick fur at his neck. She could feel the tension there. Not fear, just readiness, the kind that didn't switch off. "I'm all right," she said quietly. Her voice sounded smaller than she expected, swallowed by the open space around them. Rex didn't move, just leaned in a little more. She hadn't planned to end up here. Even now, sitting on cold concrete with a duffel bag at her feet, it didn't feel real in a way she could name. Not shock, not panic, just a kind of blankness, like something had been turned off inside her and hadn't come back on yet. A few hours earlier, she had been standing in a warm kitchen. There had been a light over the sink, a dish left to dry, the hum of a refrigerator that had always sounded too loud when the house was quiet. Her daughter, Marissa, stood near the counter, arms folded, not angry, not even upset, not in the way Lena expected. Just tired. "Mom, we can't keep doing this." That was all. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no long explanations about why or how it had come to this. Just a sentence that hung in the air and didn't leave room for anything else. Lena had waited for more. For something she could answer, something she could fix. Nothing came. Rex had been sitting by the hallway then, watching, not barking, not moving forward, just still, his eyes shifting between them. Lena remembered looking at him and thinking, he already knew. "I'll go," she had said. Her own voice had surprised her. Calm, almost polite. Marissa nodded, not relieved, not cruel, just done. There hadn't been much to pack. A few clothes, some papers she wasn't sure she needed, a photograph she didn't take out to look at, and the duffel bag she used to carry groceries when she first moved in. Rex stayed close the whole time. When Lena stepped out onto the front porch, he followed without hesitation. The door closed behind them. No sound after that. No footsteps. No voice calling her back. Just the click of the lock. Now, hours later, she sat behind a grocery store that would open again in the morning like nothing had happened. The smell of old cardboard and damp wood hung in the air. Somewhere nearby, a refrigeration unit buzzed on and off in uneven cycles. A stray plastic bag caught on a fence rattled softly every time the wind shifted. Lena adjusted the strap of the duffel bag beside her. It wasn't heavy. That was the part that felt wrong. A life should weigh more than this. She looked down at Rex. His eyes met hers for a second, then moved past her shoulder again, scanning the darkness. "You always did that," she murmured, watching everything. He gave a small huff through his nose, not quite a response, more like acknowledgement. Time passed, though she couldn't have said how much. The cold deepened, the kind that settled into joints and stayed there. At some point, she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest them. Rex shifted slightly, pressing closer. She let herself lean into him. Just a little. By morning, the sky had turned a dull gray, the kind that didn't promise warmth. The grocery store doors slid open at the front, and the first cars began pulling into the lot. Lena stood slowly, brushing dust from her coat. Her knees protested, stiff from the night. Rex stood immediately, stretching once before falling into step beside her. They didn't go back toward the front entrance. Instead, she walked toward the road. There was a bus station a few blocks down. Not much of one. Just a long bench, a vending machine that worked half the time, and a bulletin board covered in layers of old flyers and notices curling at the edges. She had nowhere else to go. That made the directions simple. The walk was quiet. Early traffic. A few people moving with purpose. None of them looking twice. Lena kept her eyes forward. Rex stayed close, his shoulder brushing her leg now and then, as if checking she was still there. At the station, she sat on the far end of the bench. The metal was cold through her coat, but it was something solid. Something expected. Rex settled at her feet, his body angled outward, facing the open space. Lena let her gaze drift. Across the street, the cracked pavement, the empty parking lot of a closed hardware store. Then, slowly, to the bulletin board beside her. Most of the papers were old. Faded yard sales, missing cats, handwritten phone numbers with half the tabs torn off. Her eyes moved over them without really reading, until they stopped. A single sheet, pinned slightly crooked, newer than the rest. The ink still dark. She leaned closer. It was handwritten, block letters, careful, deliberate. County auction, abandoned properties. Below that, a short list, storage sheds, a small barn, and then train depot, Harrow's Bend, $10, minimum. Lena stared at it. Not long, just long enough for the words to settle. A train depot. She didn't know why that meant anything to her, but it did. She reached out and touched the edge of the paper. It shifted slightly under her fingers. Rex stood up beside her, not tense, just alert. Lena glanced down at him. "You see that?" she said softly. His ears moved forward. She looked back at the notice. $10. She didn't have more than that. Not really. Her hand stayed on the paper a second longer. Then she let it fall back to her side. The wind caught the edge of the notice, lifting it slightly before it settled again. Lena sat very still. Behind her, a bus pulled in with a long sigh of air brakes. In front of her, the road stretched out in both directions. She didn't move yet. But something had shifted. Not hope, not even a plan. Just a direction. And for the first time since the door had closed the night before, that felt like enough to notice. Lena didn't stand up right away. The bus idled behind her, doors opening and closing, people stepping on and off with quiet urgency. Someone laughed. Someone complained about the cold. A driver called out a route number. All of it moved around her. She stayed where she was. Her eyes drifted back to the paper on the board, The words hadn't changed. They didn't need to. Rex shifted beside her, then sat again, his shoulder brushing her leg, grounding, steady. Lena rested her hands on her knees and stared out at the street. It hadn't started all at once. That was the thing she kept circling back to. There hadn't been a moment she could point to and say, "That's when it changed." It had been smaller than that. Quieter. She remembered the first time Marissa asked her to move her things out of the hallway closet. "Just until we reorganize," she had said. Lena nodded. Of course. It made sense. The boxes went to the garage, then from the garage to a corner behind the washer, then into the trunk of her car when space got tight. No one said anything about it after that. The house itself had always been neat, careful, the kind of place where things had their place and stayed there. Lena tried not to disturb that. She learned the rhythm of it. When the kitchen was busiest, when it was better to stay out of the living room, when the television volume went up just enough to mean the day was done and no one wanted to talk. Her son-in-law, Daniel, never raised his voice. That was what made it harder to explain. He would stand in the doorway sometimes, arms loose at his sides, watching the room like he was measuring it. Not judging, just assessing. "Long day?" he'd ask. Always polite. Always at the right distance. Lena would nod. Yes, long enough. And that would be it. But there were moments. Small ones. Like when she reached for a mug and found a different set had replaced the ones she used. Or when the chair she liked to sit in slowly filled with folded laundry until it wasn't hers anymore. Rex noticed before she did. He used to lie near the back door, stretched out, relaxed. But over time, he started choosing places where he could see more of the house at once. The hallway, the edge of the living room. His head would lift when Daniel walked through, not aggressive, not defensive, just aware. Lena would catch it sometimes and say quietly, "It's all right." Rex never argued, but he didn't fully believe it either. The conversations changed too, not in words, but in what wasn't said. Marissa used to ask her how her day was, used to sit at the table longer, even after the plates were cleared. Then the questions got shorter, the pauses longer, phones appeared more often. "Did you take Rex out? Can you grab the mail? We're heading out for a bit." All reasonable, all normal. But the spaces between them grew. Lena found herself moving more quietly, closing doors softer, timing her steps so she wouldn't cross paths if she didn't need to. She told herself it was temporary, that she just needed to give them room, that things would settle. One evening, she stood in the kitchen rinsing a plate when she heard her name from the other room. Not loud, just enough. She didn't mean to listen, but she didn't move away either. "It's not working," Daniel said. A pause. Marissa's voice came softer. "I know. She's here all the time." Another pause. "She doesn't have anywhere else. We can't be that place forever." Lena turned off the water slowly, set the plate down, dried her hands on a towel that suddenly felt too clean. Rex had lifted his head from the hallway, watching her. She didn't say anything to him. She just nodded once as if something had been confirmed. After that, things didn't get worse. They just stayed the same. And that was enough. The night she left, the house had been quiet. No television, no music. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock she had never noticed before. Marissa stood in the kitchen again, in the same spot. The words came without effort. Mom, we can't keep doing this. Lena hadn't asked what this meant. She already knew. Now, sitting at the bus station, she let out a slow breath. The memory didn't sting the way she thought it would. It felt distant, flattened, like something she had already folded and put away. Rex nudged her hand. Not hard. Just enough. She looked down at him. His eyes were steady, clear. Waiting. For what? She murmured. He didn't answer, of course. But he didn't look away either. Lena lifted her gaze back to the bulletin board. The paper was still there, still simple, still offering something she didn't understand yet. A train depot. She tried to picture it. Failed. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it existed, that it was somewhere, that it had a price she could reach. She reached down and picked up her duffel bag. The strap creaked softly as she lifted it over her shoulder. Rex stood at once. No hesitation. He shook out his coat once, then moved to her side, ready. Lena glanced back at the bench, at the spot where she had sat, at the cold metal that had held her for a while. Then she looked forward again. All right, she said quietly. Not to Rex, not to anyone, just to the moment. And then she stepped away from the station, the paper still behind her, but no longer just something she had seen. Now it was something she was moving toward. Rex walked beside her, close enough that she could feel him without looking. Neither of them rushed. There was no need. For the first time in a long while, there was somewhere to go. Even if she didn't yet know what was waiting when she got there. The bus ride took most of the morning. Lena sat near the back, her duffel tucked under her feet. Rex stretched along the aisle with his head resting on his paws. People gave them space without being asked. A dog like him did that. Not threatening. Just present. Outside the window, the city thinned out. Concrete gave way to patches of brown grass, then fields, then long stretches of road with nothing but trees and telephone poles that leaned slightly, like they'd been standing too long. Lena didn't watch the whole way. Sometimes she closed her eyes, not sleeping, just letting the motion carry her. At a transfer stop, she stepped off onto a narrow strip of pavement beside a gas station that looked like it had been there for decades without changing. The air smelled faintly of diesel and coffee. Next one's the last line out, the driver told her. You sure about Harrow's Bend? She nodded. That's where I'm going. He studied her for a second, then glanced at Rex. All right then. The second bus was smaller, older, the seats worn thin in places where countless people had sat and shifted and leaned over the years. There were fewer passengers now. A man in a work jacket, a woman with a grocery bag. No one spoke. The road narrowed again, twisted. At one point, the bus slowed to let a pickup pass in the opposite direction, the two vehicles edging around each other like they were negotiating space. Lena kept her hand resting lightly on Rex's back. He stayed alert the whole time, not restless, just aware. When the bus finally stopped, it wasn't at a station, just a sign nailed to a wooden post. Harrow's Bend, barely visible beneath chipped paint. This is it, the driver said. Lena stood, slung the duffel over her shoulder, and stepped down onto gravel. The bus pulled away behind her, leaving a quiet that settled fast. Rex stood beside her, ears forward. The town wasn't much. A handful of buildings along a single road, a closed hardware store, A diner with a flickering sign. A small office with a flagpole out front and a faded plaque by the door. Lena walked toward that. The gravel crunched under her boots. The air smelled like dry leaves and wood smoke, even though she couldn't see where it was coming from. Inside the office, it was warmer. A small heater hummed in the corner. Papers stacked neatly behind a wooden counter. A bulletin board with maps pinned in careful rows. A woman in her late 50s looked up from a ledger. Short gray hair, glasses resting low on her nose. "You hear about something?" she asked. Her voice was steady, not unfriendly. Lena stepped forward. "The depot," she said. "The one on the listing." The woman studied her for a moment. Then she nodded once. "All right." She reached behind her, pulling out a folder that looked like it had been handled many times, though not recently. "Name's Delaney," she said. "I handle the township records." She flipped the folder open and turned it so Lena could see. A photograph was clipped to the inside. The depot. Smaller than Lena had imagined. Weathered. The roof sagging on one side. "Been empty a long time," Mrs. Delaney said. "Tracks were pulled up years back. No power lines running to it anymore. Roof's taken some damage. Floor might not be stable in places." She tapped the page lightly. "County's already marked it for demolition. Spring, if funding comes through." Lena listened, didn't interrupt. Rex sat at her side, still, watching the room. "There's no water hookup," Mrs. Delaney went on. "No heat. No insulation worth mentioning. You'd be looking at starting from nothing." A pause. Then, more quietly, "Most people don't look twice at it." Lena's eyes stayed on the photograph. A depot. She didn't know why the word stayed with her. Maybe it was the idea of a place that once had a purpose. People coming, people going, something that waited. Her hand moved slightly, resting against Rex's shoulder. He didn't move. $10? She asked. Mrs. Delaney nodded. Minimum bid. No one else has put one in. Lena let that settle. No competition, no urgency, just a place no one wanted. She reached into her coat pocket. The bill was folded small, soft from being handled. She placed it on the counter. "I'll take it." Mrs. Delaney didn't reach for it right away. She looked at Lena instead. "You sure you understand what you're getting?" Lena nodded once. "I do." That wasn't entirely true, but it was enough. Mrs. Delaney exhaled quietly, then pulled a form from the folder. "All right then." She slid it across the counter with a pen. "Sign here, and here." Lena took the pen. Her hand didn't shake. She wrote her name slowly, the letters clean and deliberate. Lena Carver. The ink settled into the paper. Mrs. Delaney took the form back, stamped it with a firm press that echoed slightly in the small room, then folded the $10 bill and placed it in a metal box beneath the counter. "That makes it official," she said. She reached for a set of keys hanging on a hook. Only one key on the ring. She held it out. "About a mile out of town," she said. "Old rail line. You'll see the clearing." Lena took the key. It felt heavier than it should. Cold in her palm. Rex stood beside her, watching the exchange. "You heading out there today?" Mrs. Delaney asked. "Yes," Lena said. A brief pause. Then Mrs. Delaney nodded. "All right. Just watch your step inside. And if you need anything," she gestured lightly around the office, "you know where to find me." Lena nodded. "Thank you." She turned toward the door. Rex followed immediately, falling into place at her side. Outside, the air felt different now. Not warmer, just clearer. Lena looked down at the key in her hand, then out toward the road leading away from town. "A mile," the woman had said. She adjusted the strap of the duffel. "Come on," she murmured. Rex moved with her. They stepped off the gravel road and onto a narrow path that cut through the trees. Leaves crunched underfoot. The wind moved softly through branches overhead, carrying that same dry, steady sound. The town faded behind them, step by step, until it was just the two of them, and whatever was waiting ahead. Lena didn't rush. There was no reason to. She walked like someone who had already made the decision that mattered. The rest would come when it came. Rex stayed close, his pace matched to hers, his attention fixed forward. The path stretched on, and for the first time since she had seen that paper on the board, Lena didn't look back. The trees closed in slowly as she walked. Not dense enough to block the sky, but enough to narrow it. The light filtered through branches stripped nearly bare, casting thin, uneven shadows across the ground. Leaves, dry and brittle, cracked under each step. Rex stayed close, not brushing her leg now, just slightly ahead, his body angled forward, his head low, reading the path the way he always did. The trail shifted underfoot after a while. Gravel began to show through the dirt. Small stones, packed unevenly, the shape of something that had once been intentional. Lena slowed. Railbed, she thought. Even without rails, the line was still there. A long, straight cut through the land that didn't belong to the natural shape of it. She followed it. The air felt stiller here. The wind moved above the trees but didn't reach down as much. The quiet settled in layers. No traffic, no voices, just the faint rustle of branches and the distant call of something she couldn't place. After a while, the path widened. The trees pulled back just enough to reveal a clearing. Lena stopped. Rex did too. The depot stood at the far edge of it. It wasn't large. Smaller than it had looked in the photograph, lower to the ground. The red paint had faded to something dull and uneven, worn thin by weather and time. One side of the roof dipped slightly, the edge of it curling where shingles had lifted. The platform ran along the front, boards gray and splintered, moss creeping along the seams. No tracks. Just the long scar of the railbed stretching past it, disappearing back into the trees. Lena stood there for a moment without moving. This was it. This was what $10 bought. Rex stepped forward first. Not cautiously. Just steadily. He moved across the clearing, his paws silent on the dirt, his attention fixed ahead. Lena followed. The ground was uneven. Patches of soft earth where water must have pooled at some point. A faint smell of damp wood and something older, like dust that had settled and never been disturbed. As she reached the platform, she placed one foot on it carefully. The board creaked, not sharply, just enough to let her know it was still holding. She shifted her weight, then stepped up fully. Rex was already there, moving along the length of it, nose low, pausing now and then at the edges where the wood met the air. The door stood slightly off its frame. Lena reached for it, her hand brushing against rough paint worn smooth in places. She pushed. The hinge gave with a long, dry sound. Inside, the air changed. Cooler. Still. It carried the smell of old ash, dust, and something faintly metallic. Lena stepped in slowly. The room stretched longer than she expected. a single open space that the floor laid in wide boards dulled by time. Dust covered everything, thick enough that her footsteps left clear marks behind her. To the left, a potbelly stove sat in the corner, its pipe running up into the ceiling at an angle. The metal was dark, but intact. A wooden bench ran along the wall, worn smooth in the middle. And at the far end, the ticket booth. Set slightly into the wall, raised just enough to overlook where the tracks would have been. The window was clouded, but still whole. The frame chipped, paint peeling at the edges. Lena moved toward it. Not quickly, just drawn. Rex had already reached it. He stopped a few feet away. His posture changed. Subtle, but clear. His head lifted slightly, ears forward. Not tense, just focused. Lena noticed. She slowed even more as she came up beside him. "What is it?" she asked softly. Rex didn't respond. He took one small step forward, then stopped again. Lena followed his gaze. The booth looked empty. A small desk inside. A stool pushed halfway back. Shelves along the wall where papers might have been kept. Nothing unusual. She stepped closer. The floor creaked under her weight, the sound echoing faintly in the stillness. Rex didn't move. He stayed where he was, watching. Lena reached out and touched the edge of the booth window. Cold. The glass left a faint streak where her fingers passed over the dust. She wiped her hand lightly against her coat, then glanced down. The floor beneath them was uneven in places, some boards darker than others, some worn more than the rest. Old wood did that. Shifted. Aged differently. She didn't think much of it. Not yet. Rex let out a quiet breath. Not a sound of warning. Just attention. Lena straightened slightly. Her eyes moved around the room again. Taking it in properly this time, the ceiling showed signs of wear. One corner darkened where water must have seeped in. The walls were still solid, though the paint had long since dulled. It wasn't falling apart. Not completely. Just waiting. The thought came without effort. She walked past the booth, toward the back of the room. A door stood there, leading into what must have been a storage area. It stuck slightly when she pushed it, then gave way with a short, sharp crack. The space beyond was smaller, more damaged. Part of the ceiling had caved in, letting in a strip of gray light. Broken wood lay scattered across the floor, damp in places where rain had come through. Lena stepped just inside, then stopped. Too much for now. She turned back. The main room felt different after that. More contained, more usable. Rex had moved again. Back toward the front of the building. Then, after a moment, he circled back and returned to the same spot, in front of the ticket booth. He sat. Lena watched him. "You like that spot, huh?" she said. Her voice echoed faintly. Rex didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the space in front of him. Not searching, not scanning. Just settled. Lena let out a quiet breath. "All right," she murmured. She walked over to the bench and set her duffel down. The wood held. Solid enough. She sat. The dust shifted under her weight, rising slightly in the air, before settling again. From where she sat, she could see the booth. See Rex. See the door she had come through, still hanging slightly open, letting in a narrow line of gray daylight. It wasn't much, but it was something. A place. A roof. Walls that stood. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. Rex remained where he was, still watching. Lena followed his gaze again. The booth, the floor beneath it. Nothing there, just old boards. And yet, something about the way he held himself made it feel not empty. She didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, she leaned back slightly, letting the quiet settle around her. Outside, the wind moved through the trees again, distant but steady. Inside, the depot held its breath, and Lena sat there, in the middle of it, listening to a place that hadn't spoken in a long time. Rex didn't leave his spot. Not once. Lena watched him for a while longer, then pushed herself up from the bench. "All right," she said under her breath, more to the room than to him. "We'll figure this out." The light outside had already started to thin. The gray sky pressing down through the trees gave everything a dim, early evening feel, even though it wasn't late yet. She moved through the depot again, slower this time. Taking stock. The front room would work. It had to. The floor felt solid enough beneath her steps, except for a few boards that shifted slightly when she put weight on them. She marked those in her mind. The stove. She knelt beside it and ran her hand over the metal. Cold. Dry. The pipe above it angled up through the ceiling, and though it looked worn, it hadn't collapsed. Maybe it would still draw. If she could find something to burn. She stood again, brushing dust from her palms, and walked to the door. The clearing outside had gone quieter, the wind easing down just enough to let the silence settle deeper. "Come on," she said. Rex didn't move at first. He remained in front of the booth, eyes still fixed on the floor. Lena waited. Then, slowly, he stood. He gave one last look toward the boards beneath him before turning and following her out into the open air. The cold met them again immediately. Sharper now, it crept in through the seams of her coat, settled into her hands, her neck. Lena stepped off the platform and scanned the edges of the clearing. Fallen branches, dead limbs caught in the underbrush, enough to start something. They worked without speaking. She gathered what she could carry: dry sticks, broken pieces of wood, anything that snapped cleanly. Rex moved around her, not fetching, not playing. Just staying close, watching the tree line, the path they had come from. When she returned to the depot, her arms full, she felt the first pull of exhaustion in her shoulders. She dropped the wood beside the stove and crouched again. It took time, more time than she expected. She found an old newspaper scrap tucked beneath the bench, brittle but usable. A small metal tin near the back room held a few rusted nails and something that could strike a spark if she tried hard enough. Her hands were slower than they used to be. Stiffer. She had to stop once, flex her fingers, warm them against her coat. Rex lay down a few feet away, watching her work. Finally, a spark caught. Then another. The paper curled inward, darkening, then flared softly. The thin sticks followed, crackling in uneven bursts before settling into a small, steady flame. Lena leaned back slightly, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "There we go," she murmured. The heat was faint. But it was something. As the fire built, the air in the room shifted. Not warm, not yet, but less biting. She moved her duffel closer to the stove and sat beside it, pulling her coat tighter around her. Rex shifted closer as well, circling once before lying down with his side angled toward the heat. The light from the fire flickered across the walls, softening the edges of the room. For a moment, it almost felt livable. The first night was long. The fire needed tending. It burned down faster than she expected, the small pieces of wood turning to ash before she could build them up enough to hold heat through the night. She woke often, sometimes to the cold creeping back in, sometimes to the quiet. Each time Rex was awake before she was fully conscious, his head lifting, ears turning, then settling again when nothing followed. Once, near what must have been the middle of the night, Lena opened her eyes and saw him standing. Not near the door, not near her, but back at the ticket booth still, watching. She pushed herself up slightly. "Rex," she whispered. He didn't turn, just stood there, fixed on the same place. Lena let her head fall back against her rolled-up coat. "Tomorrow," she murmured. Her eyes closed again. The days that followed settled into something like rhythm. Cold mornings, her breath visible in the air as she stepped outside to gather more wood. The ground stiff beneath her boots. She learned quickly where the dry branches were, which trees dropped clean wood, which ones held moisture even after they'd fallen. Water was harder. She found a shallow depression behind the depot where rain had collected, but it wasn't reliable. The water tasted off, faintly metallic. She boiled it anyway. It was enough. Inside, she cleared the floor one section at a time, sweeping dust into small piles with a broken board, shifting debris toward the back room where the ceiling had already given way. The work kept her moving, kept her from thinking too far ahead. Rex stayed close most of the time, but not always. Every few hours he returned to the booth, same place, same position, sitting, watching. At first, Lena ignored it. Dogs fixated on things, sounds, smells. It didn't mean anything, but after a few days, she began to notice the pattern. He didn't scratch, didn't paw, didn't bark. He just stayed. Longer each time. One afternoon, she paused in the middle of stacking wood beside the wall and looked over. Rex was there again. Still. The light from the doorway cut across the floor, stopping just short of where he sat. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't move. Lena wiped her hands against her coat and walked over slowly. The floor looked the same as it had the first day. Old boards, uneven color, wear from years of use. Nothing new. She stepped closer. The wood creaked under her weight. Rex's ears shifted slightly, but he didn't look at her. He kept his gaze on the same spot. Lena crouched beside him. The air felt cooler here, or maybe that was her imagination. She placed her hand on the floor. Cold, solid, just wood. "You're seeing something I'm not," she said quietly. Rex let out a low breath. Not a warning, not a signal, just presence. Lena stayed there for a moment longer. Then she pushed herself back up. "All right," she said. "Later." She turned away, heading back toward the stove. But the feeling didn't leave her. Not fully. Something about the way Rex held that space stayed with her through the rest of the day. Through the next. Through the long, cold nights when the fire burned low and the depot creaked softly around her. By the fifth morning, the cold had settled deep into her bones. Her hands moved slower. Her breath came out in short bursts as she stepped outside. Rex followed her to the door, then stopped. Lena took a few more steps into the clearing before noticing. She turned. He was still inside, standing in the same place, in front of the booth, not moving. "Rex," she called. Nothing. He didn't come. Didn't even shift. Lena stood there for a moment, the cold pressing in around her, the wind moving softly through the trees. Then she turned back, stepped up onto the platform again, and walked inside. The air felt colder than it had a moment ago. Or maybe it was just the contrast. Lena closed the door behind her partway, not fully, just enough to block the wind. The room settled back into that still, quiet space she had come to recognize over the past few days. Rex hadn't moved. He stood exactly where she had left him, in front of the ticket booth, waiting. Lena slowed as she approached, her boots making soft, hollow sounds against the boards. The fire in the stove had burned down to a low glow, barely giving off heat now. "You're not coming out?" she said. Her voice didn't carry far. It seemed to stop halfway across the room, like the space absorbed it. Rex didn't respond. He lowered his head slightly. Then, slowly, he scratched once at the floor. Not hard, not frantic, just one deliberate motion. The sound was small, wood against claw, a brief scrape that faded quickly into silence. Lena stopped. She watched him. He didn't repeat it, didn't paw again. He just sat back on his haunches and looked at the same spot. "That's new," she murmured. She stepped closer. The boards beneath him looked no different than they had the day before. Worn, a little darker in places, the grain uneven from years of use. But now that she was standing over them again, something shifted in the way she saw it. Not obvious, just a difference. The boards here were slightly smoother along the edges, less splintered, the seams between them narrower, cleaner, as if they had been cut and placed with more care than the rest. Lena crouched down. Her knees protested, but she ignored it. She ran her fingers along the seam between two boards. There. A faint line. Not just where the wood met, but a cleaner break. Too straight. Too intentional. She pressed down. The wood didn't give, but beneath it, a hollow. Faint. Barely there. But real. Lena stilled. Rex shifted slightly beside her, his shoulder brushing her arm, then went still again. "You hear that?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but he stayed. Lena sat back on her heels, her eyes fixed on the boards. The room felt quieter than before, not empty, just waiting. She looked around for something to use. The depot didn't offer much. She stood and crossed to the back room, stepping over broken wood and damp patches where the ceiling had given way. The air back there carried the smell of wet rot and old nails. Against the far wall, half buried under debris, she found a length of rusted metal. It might have once been part of something, a bracket maybe, or a piece of machinery, flat enough at one end to slide beneath wood. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, cold in her hand. When she returned to the front room, Rex hadn't moved from the spot. He watched her as she approached, his eyes following the metal in her hand for a moment, before settling back on the floor. Lena knelt again. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's see." She slid the edge of the metal into the seam. At first, nothing happened. The wood resisted. Old boards, settled over time. She adjusted her grip and tried again, applying more pressure this time. The metal scraped slightly, catching on something beneath. Then a faint shift. A soft, dull sound. Lena paused. Her breath slowed. Rex leaned forward just a fraction, his body tense but not alarmed. Lena pressed again. The board lifted, just enough to show that it could move. Not nailed down the way the others were. Not fixed. She repositioned the metal and pulled upward more firmly. This time, the board gave, not suddenly. Slowly. Like something that hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Dust rose in a thin cloud as the edge came up. Lena coughed once, turning her head slightly, then leaned back in. The section of wood lifted together, not a single board. A square. Roughly cut, the size of a small crate, attached along one edge by something that creaked faintly as it moved, old leather hinges, stiff with age but still holding. Lena held it there for a moment, her hand steady despite the strain. Then she lifted it fully. Underneath, darkness. A shallow space beneath the floor. Rex stood up beside her, stepping closer now, his nose lowering toward the opening. But he didn't reach in, didn't touch. He just stood there, watching. Lena leaned forward slowly. The light from the doorway didn't reach far into the compartment, but she could make out shapes. Something inside. Several things. She reached in carefully. Her fingers brushed against metal first. A small box. Cold, smooth. She pulled it out. A tin lockbox, worn at the corners but intact. She set it down beside her, then reached in again. Paper this time. Thicker. She drew out an envelope, the edges yellowed, the surface slightly rough beneath her fingers. And then cloth. Folded. Something soft, but structured. She lifted it slowly and placed it beside the others. Finally, her hand found something smaller. Leather. A collar. Worn, but kept. She brought it out last. Rex lowered his head slightly, sniffing the air, but still not touching. Lena sat back. The open compartment between her knees. The items laid out in front of her. The room silent around them. She looked at Rex. He met her gaze for a second, then shifted his eyes back to the objects. As if to say, "This is what I brought you here for." Lena exhaled slowly. Her hands rested lightly on her thighs. She didn't reach for anything yet, just looked. The box, the letter, the collar, the cloth-wrapped shape, all of it sitting there, untouched for who knew how long. The air in the depot felt different now. Not colder, not warmer. Just changed. Like something that had been held still for a long time had finally been moved. Lena leaned forward again, her fingers hovering just above the envelope. She hesitated, then stopped. Not yet. The moment stretched. Rex remained beside her. Quiet, steady, waiting. Lena let out a slow breath. Her hand hovered above the envelope for another second, then lowered, fingers closing around it carefully, as if it might break if she wasn't gentle enough. The paper felt thick, old. The edges slightly rough, like it had been handled once and then left alone for a very long time. She turned it over. No name on the front, just a faint crease where it had been folded. Rex shifted beside her, lowering himself onto the floor again, his head resting just inches from the open compartment. His eyes stayed on the objects, alert but calm, like the urgency that had driven him here had softened into something quieter. Lena slid her thumb under the flap. It resisted at first, the glue long since dried, but still holding just enough to make her careful. She eased it open slowly. The sound was soft, a faint tear of paper releasing. Inside, a single sheet. She unfolded it. The ink had faded slightly, but the handwriting was clear, neat, measured, the kind of writing that took its time. Lena leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on her knees, and began to read. June 3rd, 1959. If you are reading this, then you have found what I left behind. My name is Evelyn Pike. I was the last station clerk at this depot. By the time you find this, the trains will have stopped for a long while. Lena paused. The room felt smaller somehow. Not closed in, just focused. She continued. They told me to leave when the line shut down, said there was nothing left here, no reason to stay. But I did, for a time. Someone had to close things properly. Someone had to remember how it was when people still came through. Lena's eyes moved steadily across the page. Rex didn't shift. I had a dog then, Atlas. He came with me most days, sat right here beside the booth, watched the tracks like he understood what they were for. When the last train left, he didn't move. I tried to take him home. He wouldn't go. Every morning he came back here, sat in this same spot, waiting. Lena glanced down. The place where Rex now lay. The same position, the same stillness. Her chest tightened slightly. She looked back to the page. I stayed longer than I should have. Not because I had to, but because it felt wrong to leave it empty all at once. Places like this, they don't end suddenly. They fade. Slowly. Like a voice that gets quieter before it disappears. The words settled into her. Quiet. Measured. She continued reading. Atlas stayed until he couldn't anymore. Even then, I think he believed something would come back. Or someone. I buried him just beyond the clearing, under the line where the trees start. I left his collar here. Lena's gaze shifted to the small leather collar lying beside the box. Worn, cracked at the edges, but kept. She reached out and touched it lightly, then returned to the letter. There's a little money in the box, not much. Just what I set aside over the years. Enough, I hope, to help whoever finds this in whatever way they need. If you're here, I imagine you needed something, so take it. Use it. Don't leave it behind like I did. Lena glanced at the tin box, still unopened, still waiting. I don't know who you are, but if you found this place and you stayed long enough to notice what was beneath your feet, then maybe you understand something about waiting too. Her fingers tightened slightly on the paper. The room was quiet. Even the wind outside had softened. This depot isn't empty. It just needed time. The last line sat there, simple and complete. Evelyn Pike. Lena lowered the letter slowly. Her hands rested in her lap, the paper still open between them. She didn't speak, didn't move. Rex lifted his head slightly, his eyes moving from the objects to her face, then back again, as if checking, as if confirming. Lena looked at him. You knew something was here, she said quietly. Rex blinked once. That was all. She let out a breath. Not heavy, just steady. Then she reached for the tin box. It was heavier than she expected, the metal cool and smooth beneath her fingers. She set it in front of her and lifted the latch. It gave with a soft click. Inside, neatly stacked bills. Old. Worn, but still bound together. Beneath them, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Lena stared at it for a moment, then closed the lid gently. She didn't count it. Didn't need to. The weight of it was enough to understand. She sat there for a long time, the open compartment between her knees, the letter resting across her lap, the collar beside her hand. Rex lay close, not tense anymore, not focused in the same sharp way, just settled. The kind of stillness that comes after something has been found. Lena folded the letter carefully, following the same creases it had held for decades. She placed it back in the envelope, set it beside the box, then looked once more at the space beneath the floor. The empty compartment now, no longer hidden, no longer waiting. She reached forward and lowered the wooden panel back into place. The hinges creaked softly as it settled. The boards aligned again with the rest of the floor. Almost seamless. Almost invisible. But not quite. Lena rested her hand over it for a moment, then pushed herself up slowly to stand. Her knees stiff, her back tight. Rex rose with her. He looked at the spot once more, then turned. Followed her toward the center of the room. The depot felt different now. Not in a way she could explain. Just less empty. Like something that had been held in place for years had finally shifted. Lena picked up the tin box, the envelope, the collar, held them carefully, then walked to the bench and set them down. She sat. Rex settled beside her. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet had changed, and it stayed that way. Lena sat on the bench, the letter resting beside her, the tin box closed, the leather collar placed carefully on top of it. The stove gave off a low, uneven heat, just enough to keep the cold from settling too deep. Rex lay at her feet, not watching the booth anymore, not holding that same fixed attention. He rested his head on his paws, eyes half open, breathing steady. Something in him had eased. Lena noticed that before anything else. She leaned forward slowly and picked up the envelope again. Her fingers traced the crease along the fold, then slid the paper back out. This time she read it slower, not looking for what it said, but for what it felt like. Evelyn Pike. A name that had no place in her life before this moment. And yet, it felt like someone had been sitting in that room long before Lena ever stepped inside it. Someone who had known the same silence, the same waiting. She looked toward the booth. The window caught a thin line of gray light from outside. Dust hung in the air, barely visible, drifting in slow, uneven patterns. I stayed longer than I should have. The line sat in her mind. Lena exhaled softly. She understood that part without needing anything else. She folded the letter again, careful with the edges, and placed it back in the envelope. Then she reached for the collar. It was smaller than Rex's. Worn smooth where a hand must have held it often. The leather darkened with age, the buckle still intact but dulled. She turned it over in her hands. Atlas. The name hadn't been written on it, but it didn't need to be. She could see him. A dog sitting in the same place Rex had chosen. Waiting. Not because he was told to, because something in him refused to leave. Lena set the collar back down. Rex lifted his head slightly, watching her, then rested it again. Different dog, she murmured. Her voice barely carried. but same idea. He didn't respond, just stayed close. The rest of the day passed slowly. Lena moved through the depot with a different kind of awareness now. Not searching, not fixing, just noticing. The way the light shifted across the floor as the clouds moved overhead. The way the boards creaked differently in certain spots. The faint smell of old paper that seemed stronger near the booth. She opened the tin box again once, not to count, just to confirm it was real. The bills were stacked neatly, as if they had been placed there with intention, not hidden in haste. She closed it again, just as carefully. It wasn't hers in the way other things had been. It felt given. That made it different. Rex followed her as she moved, but he didn't return to the booth the same way. He passed by it once, paused, then kept going. Whatever had held his attention there had quieted. Finished. By evening, the cold returned. The sky darkened faster than Lena expected, the light fading into a dull, heavy gray before slipping into shadow. She fed the fire again. The flame caught quicker this time. Her hands remembered what to do. The stove responded better, the heat spreading more evenly through the room. She sat near it, pulling her coat around her shoulders, the letter and box within reach. Rex settled beside her, closer than before. His side pressed against her leg, steady and warm. Outside, the wind moved again. Not harsh, just constant. It carried through the trees, brushing against the walls of the depot with a low, steady sound. Lena listened. She thought about the woman who had written the letter, Evelyn. Staying after everyone else had left. Not because she had to. Because she couldn't leave it unfinished. Lena looked around the room and at the bench, the stove, the booth, the space where people once passed through, where voices must have filled the air, where footsteps once came and went without pause. Now it held only her. And Rex. She didn't feel alone. That was the strange part. She should have. By any measure, she should have. But the feeling wasn't there. Not in the way it had been behind the grocery store. Not in the way it had been in the house she had left. This quiet. It wasn't empty. It had shape. Weight. Like something had settled into place instead of leaving. Lena leaned back slightly, letting the heat from the stove reach her hands. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not sleeping. Just resting in it. Rex shifted, adjusting his position, then went still again. The room held. No sudden sounds, no interruptions, just the steady rhythm of fire, breath, and wind. Later, she stood and walked to the door, opened it just enough to look out. The clearing lay in shadow now, the trees at the edge of it barely visible against the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond them, the path she had taken in. Somewhere further, the road. The town. But none of that felt close. Lena stepped back inside and closed the door again. She looked once more at the ticket booth, the boards beneath it. Now resting in place, no longer hiding anything, no longer holding something unseen, just part of the floor again. She nodded once, not to anyone, just to the space itself. Then she returned to the bench, sat, pulled the box closer, set the collar beside it. Rex lowered his head again. The fire burned low but steady. The depot stood quiet around them. And for the first time since she had arrived, nothing in the room felt like it was waiting anymore. It had already been found. Morning came quieter than the ones before. No sudden wake, no sharp cold pulling her out of sleep. Just a slow return to the room. The fire had burned down to a faint glow, the air still cool but not biting. Lena opened her eyes and stayed where she was for a moment, listening. Rex was already awake, not standing guard, just lying beside her, head up, watching the door. When he saw her stir, his tail moved once against the floor, a small, steady motion. "Morning," she said softly. Her voice sounded different, not stronger, just settled. She pushed herself up, her joints stiff but manageable now. The motions of the past few days had started to settle into her body. The depot held its shape around her, no longer something she was testing, something she was in. She moved to the stove, fed it a few small pieces of wood. The fire caught easier now, responding quicker, like it recognized the routine. Outside, the light spread slowly through the clearing, gray turning to pale gold along the edges of the trees. Lena stepped out onto the platform. The air carried a faint chill, but it wasn't as sharp as before. Rex followed, standing beside her, scanning the clearing out of habit more than need. She looked toward the line of trees where Evelyn had said the dog was buried. She didn't walk there, not yet, just noted it, then turned back inside. The work began without announcement. No decision made out loud. She picked up a loose board near the door and set it aside. Then another, cleared a space along the wall, moved the duffel to a cleaner section of the floor. It wasn't about fixing everything. Not yet. Just making it usable. Rex moved with her. He didn't return to the booth anymore. He passed it once or twice, glancing toward it briefly, then continuing on. Whatever had held him there had let go. By midday, Lena had cleared enough space near the stove to move more freely. She took a cloth from her bag, an old one, worn thin, and began wiping down the surface of the small table near the wall. Dust came away in layers. Underneath, the wood still held its grain, still solid. She paused, looking at it, then nodded slightly. "Still here," she said. Rex shifted behind her, settling near the door. The first visitor came without warning. Lena heard the sound before she saw him. Footsteps on gravel, slow, measured. Rex was up immediately, not barking, but alert. He moved toward the doorway, positioning himself just inside, his body angled toward the clearing. Lena stood, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table. A man appeared at the edge of the trees. Older, mid-60s maybe. Worn jacket, cap pulled low. He paused when he saw the open door, taking in the scene before stepping forward. "Didn't expect to see anyone here," he said. His voice carried easily. Lena stepped into the doorway. "Just got here a few days ago," she replied. The man nodded slowly. His eyes moved past her, taking in the inside of the depot, the cleared space, the stove. Rex stood still, watching him. "He's all right?" the man asked, nodding toward Rex. "He is," Lena said. Rex's posture eased slightly, but he didn't move closer. "Name's Warren," the man said, stepping up onto the platform. "Used to pass through here years back, before they pulled the line." Lena nodded. "Lena." Warren looked around again. "Didn't think anyone would bother with this place," he said. "Neither did I," Lena answered. That seemed to settle something. Warren stepped inside, his boots sounding heavier on the boards than hers had. He walked slowly, not touching anything, just looking. "Still standing better than I expected," he muttered. He glanced at the stove. "You get that running?" "Some," Lena said. "Good." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small bundle, set it on the table. "Kindling," he said, dry, easier to start a fire with. Lena looked at it, then at him. Thank you. Warren shrugged. Didn't cost me anything. He stayed a few more minutes, not asking questions, not offering advice, just standing there, letting the space settle around him. Then he nodded once. I'll be around, he said, if you need anything. Lena nodded. I appreciate that. He stepped back out into the clearing, his footsteps fading as he moved toward the trees. Rex watched until he disappeared, then turned back inside. The second visitor came later that afternoon. A woman this time, younger than Warren. Mailbag slung across her shoulder. She stopped at the edge of the platform, looking uncertain. Didn't know this was open, she said. It's not, Lena replied, then paused. But you can come in. The woman smiled slightly and stepped inside. I'm Elise, she said. I run the route through here once a week. Lena nodded. Lena. Elise looked around, her eyes taking in the space quickly. You fixing it up? She asked. Trying, Lena said. Elise reached into her bag and pulled out a thermos, set it on the table. Coffee, she said. Too much for me to finish anyway. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. Elise smiled again, smaller this time. Place looks better already, she said. Then she turned and left, the sound of her steps light against the boards. By evening, the depot felt different again. Not because of what had been found, but because of who had come through. Lena sat on the bench, the thermos open beside her, steam rising faintly in the cooling air. Rex lay at her feet, relaxed. The box and letter sat on the table, undisturbed. The collar placed beside them. She took a sip of the coffee. Warm. Stronger than she expected. She let out a quiet breath. The day had moved differently, without planning, without asking. Things had come, not taken, not forced, just arrived. Lena looked around the room, at the cleared space, at the stove holding a steady fire, at the doorway still open just enough to let the evening air in. Rex shifted slightly, settling deeper against the floor. Lena leaned back. The bench no longer felt like something borrowed. It held her weight steady, like it expected it. Outside, the light faded. Inside, the fire carried on. And for the first time, the depot didn't feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something that had started. Time moved differently after that. Not faster, not slower, just steadier. Days fell into a rhythm Lena didn't have to think about. Morning fire, water boiled, wood gathered and stacked in cleaner rows along the wall. The floor swept until the dust no longer lifted in clouds with every step. The depot changed in small ways. A board replaced here, a gap sealed there, a section of the roof patched with scrap metal Warren had brought one afternoon, setting it down without ceremony before climbing up to fix it with quiet efficiency. You don't want water coming in once the snow hits, he had said. Lena stood below, holding the ladder steady. I figured, she replied. He nodded once. That was enough. Elise came through every few days. Sometimes she stayed longer, leaned against the doorway, sipping from her thermos while Rex lay nearby, no longer watching her with the same guarded attention. You're making this place feel like something again, she said once, glancing around. Lena didn't answer right away. She followed Elise's gaze. The bench had been cleared, the table wiped clean. The stove now held a steady burn most days, not just when it was needed. "I'm just keeping it going," Lena said finally. Elise smiled. Same thing. The clearing began to change too. Not in a way you could mark on a calendar, but slowly. Someone left a bundle of split wood near the edge of the platform one morning. No note, just stacked neatly. Another day, a small jar of honey appeared on the table inside, set beside the thermos. Rex had sniffed it once, then looked up at Lena as if asking whether it belonged. She left it where it was. People began to stop. Not many, not all at once. A hiker passing through, boots dusty from the trail, pausing to rest on the bench. A man from town who remembered when the trains still ran, standing on the platform with his hands in his pockets, looking out toward the empty railbed. Lena didn't ask them questions. She didn't need to. They came. They stayed a little while. Then they left. But they didn't leave it empty. One morning, Lena woke before the light had fully come in. The air was colder now. Winter pushing closer. She rose, fed the stove, and set the kettle on top. The metal warmed slowly, the faint sound of water beginning to shift inside. Rex followed her outside as she stepped onto the platform. The sky was pale, the trees still. She looked toward the line where Evelyn had said the dog was buried. She had gone there a few days before, not with ceremony, just a quiet walk. The ground had been uneven, covered in leaves. It took her a moment to find the place, a slight rise in the earth, nothing marked. Rex had stood beside her then, still, not searching, just present. Now, standing on the platform again, she let her eyes rest there for a moment. Then she turned back inside. The ticket booth remained as it was, the boards back in place, the compartment closed. But Lena kept the letter, the box, the collar. She placed them carefully on the small table near the booth, not hidden, not displayed, just there. Sometimes she would sit nearby, her hand resting lightly on the envelope, not opening it again, just feeling the weight of it. The handwriting stayed with her. The tone, not urgent, not demanding, just certain. That afternoon, the sky cleared enough for sunlight to reach the clearing fully. It came in through the open door, stretching across the floor, catching on the edges of the boards, the legs of the bench, the side of the stove. Lena sat on the platform steps, her coat pulled around her, the warmth of the sun settling lightly against her face. Rex lay beside her. His body stretched out, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in the early days. He no longer watched the booth, no longer returned to that spot with the same pull. Whatever had been there for him, he had answered it. Now he stayed here, with her. Lena rested her hands on her knees, looking out over the clearing. The railbed stretched ahead, a long, quiet line cutting through the trees. No tracks, no movement, but it didn't feel empty. She thought about the house she had left, the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the way her name had been spoken that last time. It didn't feel sharp anymore. It didn't press against her the way it had that first night. It had settled, like something placed on a shelf, still there, but no longer carried. She looked back over her shoulder, at the doorway, at the room beyond it, at the bench that now held her things, the stove that burned steady, the table with the letter, the box, the collar, all of it simple, all of it enough. Rex lifted his head slightly, glancing at her, then rested it again. Lena let out a quiet breath. Some places don't call out. They don't ask. They don't offer explanations. They just remain. Until someone arrives who knows how to stay. She sat there a while longer, the light shifting slowly, the air cooling as the sun moved lower. Then she stood, brushing her hands against her coat. "Come on," she said softly. Rex rose immediately, falling into step beside her. They went back inside together. The door closed gently behind them. The depot held. Not waiting anymore. Just lived in. And in that quiet, steady space, Lena understood something she hadn't been able to see before. Not everything we lose is meant to be replaced. Some losses don't take something away. They move us. They shift us toward places we wouldn't have chosen, but somehow needed. Toward people we didn't know were there. Toward spaces that don't ask for anything except that we stay. She looked once more at the ticket booth, at the place where the boards had lifted, where something had been left behind long before she arrived. Rex stood beside her, calm now, no longer searching. He had seen it first, before she knew what she was looking for. Lena rested her hand lightly against his shoulder. "Good call," she murmured. He leaned into her slightly, and together they stood in the quiet of the depot, the past and present settled into the same space, no longer separate, no longer waiting, just there. Lena didn't move. Her hand rested on Rex's shoulder, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. The room held steady around them, the stove ticking softly, the boards settled back into place, the letter lying where it belonged now.
For a long time she had thought being left meant something about her, that a door closing was the end of something she hadn't done right. But standing there, she realized nothing here had been abandoned. Not the depot, not the woman who brought the letter, not even the dog who refused to leave his spot. They had all just been waiting in their own way. Rex had seen it before she did. Not the money, not the letter, the place, the one spot that didn't feel empty. Lena looked once more toward the ticket booth, then back at him. "You knew," she said quietly. Rex didn't answer. He never did. But he had brought her here anyway, and sometimes that was enough. She stepped forward, the floor steady beneath her feet now, the room no longer something to pass through, but something to stay in. And if a place like this can waste years, maybe even a lifetime for the right person to walk in, how many things in your life have been waiting quietly while you thought they were already gone?